Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Ashley Martella. We're on the line with Michael Thielen, the Executive Director of the Republican National Lawyers Association, regarding that alleged recount in Minnesota that ended with certification of a result showing Al Franken the leader of the U.S. Senate race by 225 votes. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
I'm glad to be here.
On the surface, it appears to many as if Democrat Secretary of State Mark Ritchie revealed himself to be little more than a left-wing partisan political hack intent on getting Franken to upset Norm Coleman by hook or by crook. Do you agree with that?
I wouldn't use those exact words, but yes, I do.
Okay. In your opinion, did Al Franken outright steal this election?
Ritchie working with Ritchie, the Secretary of State, Mark Ritchie, seemed to consistently rank Franken's positions and disenfranchise many of Minnesota's voters. Unfortunately, we'll never know the truth of what really the result of the election should be because he's ignored many things during this election and the will of many voters.
Michael, in your opinion, what were the most egregious transgressions?
There were a number of them, and basically, in a sense, Secretary of State Ritchie was consistently inconsistent. By that I mean on the outright fraud level, for example, there were ballots where Coleman voters filled in the circle, but they put an X over it, and Franken voters did the same thing. They put a circle, they filled in the circle on the ballot because it's a Scantron ballot, and put an X over it. The canvassing board ruled the intent of the voters in the case of the Franken voters was to vote for Franken. The intent of the voters in the Coleman voters' case was to not vote. They were Xing out and rejecting their vote. These ballots were identical except for the votes were for Coleman or for Franken. I mean, it's clear evidence that they were not following the same standards for all the voters. There's a number of other outrages as well.
What are some of the most serious ones?
Well, the most serious ones is how they have decided things, they deferred issues to the court that favor Coleman, and they've decided issues in favor of Franken that favor Franken now. For example, the counting of rejected absentee ballots. Originally, the Democrat Attorney General of Minnesota said that those were issues for an election contest for the courts to do after this phase, the recount. However, Ritchie decided to recommend to the various county election boards that they count these rejected ballots that they allege were improperly counted before the recount phase. Some of the counties decided to accept that recommendation. Some of the counties didn't. It was mass chaos where you had different standards in different places. Ritchie gave some direction, but inconclusive direction. In the end, he ended up doing exactly what the Franken lawyers wanted him to do. When it became apparent that they were going to do this, and the Supreme Court, with some major caveats in Minnesota, agreed. What they did is they took the Franken standard only. They ignored Coleman's request to add some other ballots which were wrongfully rejected from Republican-leading counties, and they did not include those at all. So in other words, what they did was they included Franken votes, votes from counties where Franken won or was favored, and they ignored votes from counties where Coleman was favored.
Why do you think the Minnesota Supreme Court rejected Coleman's request to count those absentee ballots?
The Minnesota Supreme Court is in an unusual situation. The courts do not like to react this fast or this quickly, and the courts were not trying. They were trying as much as possible to stay out of it. The court decision on the rejected absentee ballots was very strange. It basically said, we don't want to do this. We want you, the Coleman campaign, the Franken campaign, and the Secretary of State to agree on a procedure to do this. What unfortunately happened, of course, was the Secretary of State and Franken agreed, and then Coleman did not agree, so they did not address all the ballots, and they let this go forward. Now, the court just issued an opinion on that today, and they said, well, we think we want to wrap this up, basically. The rest of this will go to the court later on. So in a sense, the court punted the decision down the field to a trial court to decide it at a later date.
Now, that Minnesota Supreme Court ruling, can that be appealed to, say, the U.S. Supreme Court?
Yes, but the Minnesota Supreme Court ruling at this point is not an appealable issue in the sense that it's going to an election contest anyways, and that's where the issues would all be addressed. So the U.S. Supreme Court's not going to jump in there and say anything because the U.S. Supreme Court would say they don't have standing. This is an issue for the trial court. They have a special panel, actually, a 3-judge panel in Minnesota for the election contest.
Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, who takes a backseat to nobody when it comes to partisan politics, declares flat out that Franken is the winner and should be seated. Can anything be done to stop that?
Well, number one, he's completely and utterly wrong. Minnesota law says an election is not certified till election contests are complete. And there's a bit of an irony going on with Schumer's statement here because Senator Reid's spokesman today said that they would not seat Burris of Illinois, who was appointed by the governor, but the certificate has not been signed by the Secretary of State of Illinois. In Minnesota, we have the exact same situation. The Secretary of State of Minnesota, in a sense, is saying that Franken's the winner, but the governor has not signed on to it, nor can it be certified until the court contests are done. So in other words, Schumer's trying to seat a person who has not been certified by the state of Minnesota, by the voters of Minnesota, as the winner of the Senate seat.
Michael Thielen, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.